Poor girl sold daisies for medicine, never expecting a millionaire CEO to buy her bouquet. One morning, Emily stood on the corner of a busy street holding a small box of daisies. She was only 7 years old, but her face showed a kind of sadness far beyond her age. Each flower in her hands meant hope. Hope that she could sell them and buy medicine for her sick mother. "Please, would you like to buy some daisies?" she asked strangers walking by. Her voice was soft, almost breaking, but nobody seemed to care. Some people ignored her completely, others shook their heads. A few looked at her with pity but kept moving. Emily had been trying for days. Her mother had collapsed the week before, and the doctor said she needed regular medicine. Without it, things could get worse quickly. Emily remembered the doctor's words clearly, and it scared her. She didn't have a father to help. He had passed away when she was 5. Since then, her mother had done everything to take care of her, even when she was sick. Now, it was Emily's turn. She sold daisies because they were the only thing she could find for free. She would wake up early, pick them, and hope someone would give her enough money. But most days, she earned almost nothing. That morning, she had only sold one small bunch, not even enough to buy bread, let alone medicine. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. All she could think about was her mother lying weak in bed at home. She whispered to herself, "If I sell just 3 more, I can buy 1 pack. Please God, help me." Just then, a man in a blue suit walked out of a shiny black car. He looked important. The kind of person Emily thought would never notice her. His name was Alexander Grant, a millionaire CEO who owned one of the largest companies in the city. People often moved out of his way when he walked, and even now, the crowd seemed to step aside as he headed toward the cafe across the street. Emily gathered her courage and held out a small bouquet. "Sir, please, will you buy some daisies? I need money for medicine." Alexander stopped and looked at her. At first, he thought it was just another child selling things for pocket money. But when he saw her thin face, her trembling hands, and the way she clutched the flowers as if her life depended on them, something hit him deep inside. "What medicine?" he asked, his voice calm but serious. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "For my mom, she's very sick. The doctor said she needs pills every day, but I don't have money. Please, just buy 1 bouquet, it's only $2. She lifted the flowers higher, almost begging. Alexander didn't move for a moment. He wasn't a man who usually stopped for strangers. His world was full of business meetings, contracts and numbers. Not little girls selling daisies. But something about her words broke through the wall he had built around his heart. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a $100 bill. Emily's eyes widened. She had never seen that much money before. "Take this," he said, handing her the bill. "And keep your flowers." Emily shook her head quickly. "No, sir. Please take them. They're for you." Her voice cracked. She held the daisies out with both hands, as if giving away the most precious thing she owned. Alexander hesitated, then accepted the bouquet. The petals were simple, nothing fancy. But the gesture touched him in a way he hadn't expected. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily," she replied softly. He nodded. "Emily, you shouldn't be standing here alone. Where's your mother now?" "At home," she whispered. "She's too weak to come outside." Alexander looked at the small girl, then at the daisies in his hand. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest, something human, something warm. He had all the money in the world, but in that moment, he realized how little it meant compared to what this child was fighting for. "Show me where you live," he said quietly. Emily's heart raced. She didn't know whether to trust him, but his eyes didn't look cold like the others. They looked serious but kind. She nodded slowly. "It's not far." Together, they walked down the street, an unlikely pair. A millionaire in a perfect suit, and a little girl clutching an empty box. Passers-by stared, but neither of them cared. As they reached a small apartment building with peeling paint, Emily led him upstairs. She opened the door to a tiny room where her mother lay on a thin mattress, pale and weak. The sight made Alexander pause. He had seen many things in his life, but this simple room carried more truth than any boardroom he had ever walked into. Emily ran to her mother. "Mom, I got money for your medicine! And this man helped me." Her mother looked up weakly, her eyes confused as they landed on the tall stranger in the suit. She tried to sit up, but coughed instead. Alexander stepped forward, placing the daisies on the small table beside the bed. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "You'll get the medicine you need." For the first time that day, Emily allowed herself to smile. She didn't know who this man really was or why he had stopped. But she felt hope again. Hope she hadn't felt in a long time. And Alexander, holding the memory of the little girl's trembling hands and desperate eyes, knew this was not the last time he would see her. Alexander stood quietly in the small apartment, watching Emily's mother struggle to breathe. The room was dim, the furniture worn out, but what struck him most was the love in the girl's eyes as she sat beside her mother, holding her hand tightly. Emily's mother looked fragile, but she still tried to smile for her daughter's sake. "Sir, you don't need to stay," the woman whispered weakly. "Thank you for helping Emily. We'll manage somehow." Alexander shook his head. "You're not managing. And a child shouldn't be out on the streets selling flowers just to buy medicine. This isn't right." Emily looked between them nervously. She didn't want to lose the little bit of hope she had gained. "Please, sir, don't leave us yet." Her words pierced Alexander's heart. He was a man used to power, money, and respect, but here in this tiny apartment, he felt a responsibility he couldn't ignore. He turned to Emily's mother. "What exactly do you need? Tell me the medicine, the treatment, everything." The woman hesitated. Pride had kept her from asking for help before. "It's too expensive," she whispered. "We can't afford the prescriptions." "I don't want charity." Alexander's voice grew firm. "This isn't charity. This is what should have been done for you a long time ago. I'll cover the costs. You need proper treatment, and Emily deserves a childhood, not a struggle." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes. She nodded slightly, unable to argue further. Emily clutched Alexander's sleeve. "Really, sir? You'll help us?" He looked down at her and softened. "Yes, Emily. Starting today, things will change." That afternoon, Alexander called his driver, and arranged for the best doctor in the city to visit. Emily watched in amazement as men in suits carried in medical supplies she had never seen before. The doctor checked her mother carefully, prescribed the right medicines, and promised that with treatment, she could recover her strength. Emily's mother whispered again and again, thank you," but Alexander only shook his head. Later, when the doctor left, Alexander sat on the old chair by the window. Emily stood in front of him, holding the now empty flower box. "Sir," she said softly, "you didn't just buy flowers today, you saved my mom." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He thought about his own life, endless meetings, luxury cars, a mansion filled with things but not people. For years he had closed himself off, convinced that money was the only thing worth chasing, but this little girl and her simple daisies had opened something inside him. "Emily," he asked gently, "why didn't you tell anyone else about your mom? Why go alone?" She lowered her head. "People don't listen. They walk away. Some laugh. Some say I should be in school. Not begging. But I wasn't begging, I was just trying to buy medicine. I thought maybe God would send someone kind." She looked up at him with wide eyes. "And then you came." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't used to emotions like this. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his business card, and handed it to her. "This has my number. If you ever need anything, call me. Promise me you won't go back to the streets alone." Emily took the card carefully, as if it were made of gold. She nodded. "I promise." From that day Alexander visited often. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes toys, sometimes books, but most of all, he brought comfort. The kind of presence Emily had been missing since her father passed away. Her mother grew stronger with each week of treatment, and slowly, life in that tiny apartment began to feel hopeful again. Yet it wasn't just Emily's family that was changing. Alexander himself was transforming. His employees noticed he was more patient, more understanding. His business partners noticed he asked different questions, not just about profits, but about people. He had been a man who lived only for success, but now every time he saw Emily's smile, he remembered that money meant little without purpose. One evening, as he prepared to leave after another visit, Emily stopped him at the door. "Sir," she said shyly, "I know you have everything, but if you ever feel lonely, you can come here. We don't have much, but you'll always have family with us." The words nearly broke him. He had spent years surrounded by wealth, yet he had never felt at home anywhere. And now, in a rundown apartment with peeling walls, a 7-year-old girl had given him what he didn't even know he needed, belonging. He bent down, looked into her eyes, and said quietly, "Thank you, Emily, that means more than you know." That night, as he sat in his car, bouquet of daisies still resting on the seat beside him, Alexander realized something. The girl who sold flowers for medicine had given him something priceless in return. A reason to care, a reason to live differently. And he knew deep inside, this was just the beginning. The following week, Alexander found himself thinking about Emily more than he expected. In meetings, his mind wandered to her smile. At night, when he returned to his empty mansion, he remembered her words. "You'll always have family with us." For a man who had spent years building walls around his heart, those words echoed louder than any boardroom discussion. One afternoon, Alexander decided to stop by the small apartment again. He carried a bag of groceries in one hand and a box of books in the other. When Emily opened the door, her eyes lit up. "You came back!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him without hesitation. He was caught off guard, but the warmth of her hug felt real, something he hadn't experienced in years. "I told you I'd check in," he said with a small smile. "How's your mom?" Emily beamed. "She's better. She sat up today and even ate soup. She said to tell you thank you for everything." Inside, her mother was indeed stronger. She greeted Alexander with a soft smile and tried to stand, but he gently motioned for her to rest. "Don't push yourself too fast," he advised. "Recovery takes time." Over the next hour, Alexander read to Emily from one of the books he brought. She sat cross-legged on the floor, listening carefully, her eyes full of wonder. He hadn't read aloud to anyone since he was a child, and the simple act felt surprisingly meaningful. After finishing a chapter, Emily asked him curiously, "Sir, do you have children?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated before answering. "No, I don't. I never married. And I never thought about having kids." "Why not?" Emily tilted her head. He looked at her, then away. "Because I was too busy chasing things I thought were important. Money. Business, success. But I guess I never stopped to think about what I was missing." Emily was silent for a moment, then whispered, "You'd make a good dad. You care, I can tell." Her words landed heavily on his heart. He had never imagined himself as a father figure, but in that moment, he wondered if she was right. Later that week, Alexander invited Emily and her mother to the hospital for a more thorough check-up. He insisted on paying for all the tests. The doctors confirmed that with consistent medicine and proper care, her mother could recover fully in time. Relief washed over both Emily and her mother. But it was Alexander who felt the deepest shift. He realized he wasn't just helping out of kindness, he had become invested in their lives. One evening after driving them back home, Alexander sat in his car longer than usual, staring at the apartment door. For years his world had revolved around numbers and deadlines. Now, a little girl selling daisies had made him feel like he had a purpose bigger than himself. The next morning, as he walked into his office, his assistant noticed something different. "You seem lighter," she commented cautiously. "Everything all right?" Alexander gave a rare, genuine smile. "Yes. For the first time in a long time. Everything feels all right." But not everyone understood. At a board meeting later that week, some executives questioned his recent decisions. "Sir, you've been allocating company funds toward community projects, clinics, and outreach programs," one of them said. "This isn't our usual strategy. It doesn't maximize profit." Alexander looked around the table, his voice steady. "Not everything is about profit. Sometimes it's about people. And if this company can't understand that, then we've lost more than money. We've lost our soul." The room went silent. The same man who had once been known as a ruthless businessman was now speaking about compassion. It shocked them, but no one dared argue. Meanwhile, Emily continued to grow closer to him. She began waiting at the window every afternoon, hoping to see his car. When he arrived, she would run down the stairs, calling out, "Sir!" Her joy made him forget the stress of his world. One Saturday, Alexander surprised her with a small outing. "How would you like to go to the bookstore today?" he asked. Her eyes widened. "Really? I've never been inside one before." So they went. Inside the large bookstore, Emily walked slowly, her eyes scanning the rows of colorful covers. She touched each book carefully, as if it were treasure. "There are so many stories," she whispered in awe. Alexander watched her quietly. The wonder in her eyes reminded him of the child he once was, before he lost his parents young and hardened himself to the world. He felt as though he was getting a second chance, not at childhood, but at being the kind of adult he wished he had known. At the counter, Emily picked a small storybook about friendship. She held it tightly, as though it were the most valuable thing in the store. Alexander paid without hesitation, but when he tried to buy her more, she shook her head. "Just this one," she said softly. "It's enough." On the way home she leaned against him in the car, tired but happy. "Thank you, sir. Today was the best day ever." And for Alexander it truly was. He realized that happiness wasn't found in luxury or wealth, it was found in giving. In seeing joy on someone else's face. That night, as he placed the daisies Emily had once given him in a glass vase at his mansion, he whispered to himself, "This is what life should feel like." He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't walking away from Emily and her mother. Not now, not ever. The weeks turned into months, and Alexander's visits became a natural part of Emily's life. She no longer waited on street corners with daisies, instead, she waited at the window, certain that her new friend would arrive. For Emily, Alexander was not just the man who bought her flowers. He had become someone she could count on. Someone who brought stability to her world. Her mother grew stronger with each passing week. The medicine was working, and she was able to walk again without struggling for breath. One afternoon, as she prepared tea in their tiny kitchen, she turned to Alexander and said, "You've given us more than health. You've given us dignity back. I don't know how to repay you." Alexander shook his head. "Don't think of it that way. You've given me something I didn't even know I needed. You've reminded me that life isn't about what you collect. It's about who you care for." Emily listened quietly, her small hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She smiled at his words, though she didn't fully understand them. All she knew was that her mom was smiling again, and that made her heart light. One evening, Emily sat with Alexander on the floor, coloring in a sketchbook he had brought her. She glanced up suddenly and asked, "Sir, do you ever feel lonely?" He froze at the question. Nobody asked him things like that. People in his world wanted to know about profits, investments, or success. But this 7-year-old girl wanted to know his heart. Slowly he answered, "Yes, Emily, I feel lonely a lot. I have a big house, many cars, everything money can buy, but sometimes it all feels empty." Emily tilted her head. "Then why don't you come here more? You don't have to be lonely if you have us." Her innocent words hit him like a wave. He smiled softly, trying to hide the emotions stirring inside him. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe I should come here more often." From that night onward, he did. He wasn't just a visitor anymore, he became a part of their routine. He helped Emily with her schoolwork, drove her to the library, and even cooked dinner with her mother sometimes. Though he wasn't very good at it, the community began to notice. Neighbors whispered when they saw the wealthy CEO walking into the old apartment building carrying bags of groceries or books. Some wondered why a man of his status would spend time in such a place. But Alexander didn't care what they thought. For the first time he was living for more than appearances. One Saturday, Emily tugged on his hand and asked, "Sir, can you come with me to school next week? It's parent day. Other kids will have their moms and dads there." The request startled him. He looked over at her mother, uncertain. But her mother gave a gentle nod. "She doesn't have a father anymore. If you're willing, I think it would mean the world to her." Alexander swallowed hard. He had given speeches in front of hundreds of investors without breaking a sweat, but the idea of walking into a classroom filled with children felt terrifying. Still, when he looked down at Emily's hopeful eyes, he knew his answer. "Of course," he said quietly. "I'll be there." When the day arrived, Emily clutched his hand tightly as they walked into the school. Her classmates stared, some whispering, others pointing. They all knew Emily as the quiet girl who never had money for new clothes or supplies. Now she walked in proudly with a tall man in a suit at her side. The teacher smiled warmly. "Emily, is this your father?" Emily looked up at Alexander. He hesitated for a moment, then bent down and whispered, "It's okay. You can say it if you want." Her face lit up. She turned to the teacher and said proudly, "Yes, this is my dad." Alexander's heart clenched. No title, no deal. No amount of money had ever given him the sense of worth that those words did. He sat with Emily throughout the day, helping her with small projects, answering the teacher's questions, and watching her glow with happiness. Later, as they walked out together, Emily skipped beside him. "Did you see? Nobody teased me today. They all thought I was just like them. Thank you, Dad." He stopped walking, stunned by the word. He hadn't expected her to say it again, but when he looked at her face, bright, innocent, full of trust, he realized he didn't mind. In fact, it filled a space inside him he hadn't known was empty. That evening, back at his mansion, Alexander stared at the daisies in the vase. They were dry now, their petals curled. But he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. They reminded him of the day everything changed. The day a poor girl selling flowers had given him more than money could buy. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what I was meant to find all along." Over the next few weeks, his bond with Emily deepened. He began to rearrange his schedule, choosing time with her over late-night meetings. His board grew restless, warning him that his focus was shifting too much. But he no longer cared about their warnings. For years, he had been defined by numbers. Now he wanted to be defined by love. One night, as he tucked Emily into bed after reading her a story, she held his hand tightly and said, "Promise me you'll never leave, Dad." He looked into her eyes and said firmly, "I promise." And he meant it. For the first time in his life, Alexander Reed, a man who once thought money was everything, had found the one thing he couldn't buy: family. Life began to feel different for Alexander, Emily and her mother. The small apartment that once held silence and worry was now filled with laughter, warmth and hope. Alexander became a constant presence, no longer just a visitor. He was part of their daily lives, helping Emily with homework, making sure her mother had her medicine, and even cooking simple meals that always ended with Emily teasing, "Dad, you burn toast worse than anyone I know." One evening, Emily asked him a question that made him pause. "Dad, if you never stopped that day, if you never bought my daisies, what would have happened?" Alexander looked at her seriously. "Maybe I would have kept walking. Maybe I would have stayed the same man I was, rich but empty. But then I would have missed you, Emily. And that would have been the greatest loss of my life." Her small hand slipped into his. "I'm glad you didn't walk away." So was he. As weeks turned into months, the bond between them grew stronger. Emily's mother was recovering well, and though she still needed medicine, her energy had returned. One Saturday afternoon, she pulled Alexander aside while Emily played with her dolls. "I need to say something," she began gently. "You've done more for us than I could ever repay." You gave Emily her smile back, and you gave me strength again. But I can see it in her eyes. She doesn't just see you as a helper. She sees you as her father. And I think maybe you see her as your daughter too. Alexander swallowed hard. The truth was undeniable. "I do," he admitted. "She changed me. She made me realize I'd been living without love. Now I don't want to imagine life without her." Her mother smiled softly. "Then don't. She deserves someone who won't leave. And I believe that person is you." That night, Alexander sat alone in his mansion, staring at the vase of dried daisies. They had lost their color, their petals falling, but to him, they were priceless. They reminded him of the little girl who had changed his world with a bouquet and a plea for her mother's life. The next day, he made a decision. When he arrived at the apartment, Emily ran to him as always, her laughter filling the air. He knelt down, holding her shoulders gently. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but tender. "How would you feel if I wasn't just visiting anymore? How would you feel if I became your real dad?" Her eyes widened. "You mean forever?" He nodded. "Forever. If your mom agrees, I'd like to adopt you, Emily. I'd like you to be my daughter, not just in words, but in every way." For a moment, Emily was speechless. Then tears rolled down her cheeks as she threw her arms around him. "Yes, yes, Dad! I want that more than anything." Her mother, standing nearby, covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. She nodded, unable to speak. The following weeks were filled with paperwork, meetings and legal steps, but Alexander didn't mind. For once, he was chasing something money couldn't buy: a family. When the adoption was finalized, Emily clutched his hand tightly in the courtroom, smiling up at the judge. "I always knew he was my dad," she whispered proudly. From that day forward, their lives were never the same. Alexander moved them into his home, not because he wanted to show off his wealth, but because he wanted them to be comfortable and safe. The mansion, once cold and empty, was now alive with laughter, cooking smells, and the sound of Emily running through the halls. One evening, Alexander found Emily in the garden, holding a fresh bunch of daisies she had picked herself. She handed them to him with a shy smile. "Dad, these are for you. Not for medicine this time. Just because I love you." He took them gently, his chest tightening with emotion. "Emily, the day you sold me those daisies was the day my life began again. And I'll never forget that." The three of them stood together under the soft evening sky. No longer a struggling family and a lonely man, but something greater. A family built on love, kindness, and second chances. Alexander had once believed his wealth defined him, but now he knew the truth. It was a little girl with daisies who gave him everything money never could. And as Emily held his hand, smiling brighter than the sun, he realized this was the life he was always meant to find. This story reminds us all that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. A little girl selling daisies didn't just save her mother. She also saved a man who thought he had it all but was missing love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world and helps us bring more stories of kindness and hope. Thank you for giving us your precious time.